Do you remember the song, If I Ruled the World? I'm talking about the Tony Bennett version of it. Some of you immediately went to the rapper from the 90s, Nas. That's not the one. Tony Bennett's version, originally written for a musical, Pickwick. It was based on a book by Charles Dickens. That version of the song starts this way. If I ruled the world, every day would be the first day of spring. Every heart would have a new song to sing, and we'd sing of the joy every morning would bring. If I ruled the world, every man would be as free as a bird. Every voice would be a voice to be heard. Take my word, we would treasure each day that occurred. So if you ruled the world, would it look any different than it does right now? Truly, if you were the one dictating the terms of this world, if you think virtually every Miss America pageant, that question has come up. If you were in charge of the world, what would you do? They give some version of world peace. Why would you envision a world different than the one you're living in, ruled by God? Why would your concept of the world look so different? To be real frank, this is kind of a point of trouble for Christianity. See, the trouble is, we're in a world where we claim there's a good, loving God who's in control of everything, and then really difficult moments happen. Some of them are kind of personal. I know someone who was deceiving people at their job. He came clean about it, and everybody at work praised him for his ethical behavior of coming clean. Ultimately, he reverted back to the exact same deceptive behavior as before. But you know, kind of the general sense at work was, well, is it really that bad? He seems like such a good guy. And we think that just seems wrong. Other times that we struggle with is not like a personal thing at work. It's just horrific. You see a college student from Georgia get gunned down because somebody got released from jail too easily. And you're trying to mesh that with, okay, we're saying we have a good God who's in control of everything. Then why? Other things in the Christian life seem to also kind of play into those fears. But here's what I find is that the way Christians process it is where the challenge is. We process it in a way that I think often we kind of just excuse the way the world is. Or we kind of ignore it, you might say. Picture this for just a moment. You take your kid or grandkid to a new school. They've gotten picked on in the past, and it's really been an issue. So you're going to take them to a new school, and before you do so, you sit down with the principal. And the principal reassures you that his school has a no tolerance policy for bullying or fighting of any kind. Well, within the first week, you hear that your grandson's come home with a torn backpack. And after a little investigation, it's because the kids at school are picking on him. So you call the school. And they say, we know, we think it was very minor. We didn't want to step in. We also want kids to learn to stand up for themselves. After the second incident, when he actually gets hurt, You call the school again. And they kind of slough it off. They say some things in life are going to cause some bumps and bruises, and that develops character. The third time through, he comes home. He's been picked on by multiple kids. You're back at the school, this time in person. And they say, ma'am, I think what you need to do is you need to process what it looks like to actually forgive somebody instead of coming up here to this school every time your son has a bad day. Does Christianity feel that way? That wrongs happen and you wish something would be done about it, but you feel like the Christian response is, well, we just need to forgive them. We need to learn to be steadfast. Sometimes God's just using this to build your character. Do you ever want to say, but when's something going to be done? Like, this is wrong. Like, I want to live this thing out, but at the same time, if I'm trying to live for God and they're doing whatever they want to do, and it looks like we both get the same result, what's the point? That thought, right? That thought every now and then creeps into our mind. And at the same time, if I can be real frank, if you don't really wrestle down that thought, it is the seedbed for bitterness. If you think they're going to go unpunished, so if nothing else, I'm going to keep my grudge. Because you think in the end, if I just forgive and I let it go and it develops my character and all this kind of stuff, and they just get away with it, that doesn't seem right. Traditionally, this idea has been called the problem of evil. So, we have the problem of evil is the thing Jesus is addressing. He's addressing this really kind of complicated, challenging idea in a way that's somewhat of a cute story, a parable. He's breaking it down. I said the best teachers can teach a complex idea on a 5-year-old's level. So Jesus broke it all the way down to Mitch's level. So he's really putting this on display. So the way we'll work through it is we're going to outline just in definition form, problem of evil. And then Jesus' response in this parable, which ultimately he lands at, in his explanation, two unimaginable, unfathomable truths that guide this conversation. So let's talk through the problem of evil. It goes like this. So if you're a believer, you've been a believer for a while, I need you to think like you are not a believer for just a moment. Be very skeptical for just a moment. Here's the skeptical argument for why God is not who Christians say he is. This is the problem of evil kind of outlined. So for just a moment, think like a non-Christian, a guy you know at work. Think like him. That wasn't fair. But you get the idea. Here's the argument. You can't have a good God who's in control of everything if evil exists. You see the logic of that? You can't have a good God who's in control of everything if evil exists. Here's the logic, just very basically, in kind of pop terms. Either you have a God who is good, but he's not all-powerful, therefore, bad things happen. And he would love to do differently, but he's not all powerful. He can't be in control entirely. Or you have a God who's in control, like Christians claim, but clearly he's not completely good, because we have had things like the Holocaust. So you can't have an all-powerful good God with the existence of evil. So Jesus is presenting or confronting that idea. But it's not just a modern concept that you see evil done and you want something done about it. I love, if you have more time, read through the book of Luke. James and John, the Zebedee brothers, the brothers of thunder. Have you heard? Hopefully you knew that was their nickname, the Thunder Brothers. I really think if they were alive right now, they're both UFC fighters, right? I really do. And they're the Thunder Brothers. It's a tag team deal. So the Thunder Brothers go out preaching with Jesus, right? James and John are preaching with Jesus. They go beforehand with the message to the Samaritans in Luke chapter 9, and the Samaritans do not receive the message. So maybe a gentler person, like Andrew strikes me, Thomas, they both strike me as gentler people. They probably would have said, I think we need to go back a second time. Do you remember what James and John said? Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? The UFC fighters are like, listen, God, I know how this ends up. I've been in enough of these scraps. If they don't come around the first time, we might as well burn the place down. What they thought was, God is good and he's in control, so if somebody's going to act evil, there should be immediate consequences. I mentioned the Holocaust. One author of the book, After Auschwitz, after he's studied Auschwitz, after he's walked through how horrific it was, one horrific story after another of killing people in creative ways just for sport. He sees the evil of the world and draws this conclusion. He says, after Auschwitz, it is impossible to believe in God. That concept is the problem. How do we understand living in a world controlled by God when he claims to be good and we see so much ugliness around us? What's the answer for that? So it is a very serious question in many respects. The seriousness of it, however, is nuanced and addressed multiple places in Scripture. Jesus is going to talk to believers at this point. And he's going to say, believers, I want you to see how to understand this and how to process it. So he does so, as we said, through this parable. So Jesus' parable, as was cleverly given to me this week, there's 3 parts to this parable. The first part is clearly a sower. You got a farmer who goes out and sows. The second part is there's sabotage done to the field. Weeds are mixed in. Then the part that's clever is then you have a sickle or a harvest. Sower, sabotage, and a sickle. I would say sower, sabotage, and a harvest. 3 parts to this parable. So the sower goes and sows much seed. We find out from the explanation that the one who sows the seed is the Son of Man. So Jesus goes out and sows the seed. Let me try to be as clear as I can. Obviously, from the details of the parable, the sowing that takes place is rebirth. born again, people who become Christians. It's not initial birth, but because in just a moment we're going to see the enemy sows other seed. Well, Satan doesn't cause somebody to be born, right? So we're talking about rebirth. So he sows the seed. When you're reborn, you become part of the kingdom of heaven. So it's his explanation. The kingdom of heaven is made up of these born-again believers. In this field, it's a very simple idea, but it's incredibly profound. Jesus is the owner and the farmer of a large-scale operation in that point in time. To have a big enough operation as the parable runs, that you've got harvesters and servants who are out managing your fields because they're too big for you, is a big operation. What is the field? Thankfully, he clearly defines it. The field in the explanation is the world. Let me just pause briefly. Some of you have been around church for a while. Every now and then, this parable has been told that the field is the church and that there are wheat and tares that both grow up in the church and they sit in the same pew by each other. To be real frank, that's entirely fallacious and does not give respect to the book of Matthew. He very much says the field is the world. And he says, in the world, you're not going to uproot the weeds. Matthew 18, he tells the church, if there are weeds in your congregation, uproot them. So it can't be the church. So here's what he is saying. Here's the profundity of it. The field is the world, and Jesus owns it. And the word for world there in the Greek is cosmos. He is doubling down on Jesus Christ owns this universe. He owns it. Whether you are a wheat and you follow Christ, or you're a weed and you don't care if God really exists or not, wherever you lay your head down at sleep at night, you're laying your head down on a piece of property Jesus owns. He is the owner of the world. So he says the world has rebirth that takes place, and they come up as these stalks of wheat in the world, in the field. So on the one hand, he's laying out, remember our problem of evil? God can't be in control and be good. What is he clearly establishing at this point? He's in control. He owns the field. However, sabotage comes in the parable form to explain this concept to us. On the one hand, this is not a fictitious scenario, so if you could envision this with me for just a moment. You go out early season. If you're planting so many fields that you have a pretty wide-scale operation, this is going to be a pretty lucrative, we would put it as big business in our day. So you go out, wheat fields everywhere. I don't know if you've been to the Midwest and you've seen wheat as far as the eye can see, or maybe even corn in some areas of the country, as far as the eye can see, and it just seems like a sea of wheat. So it is very much big business. What they would do at that point in time is their competitor would try to destroy them economically. So they would come back in the middle of the night, and all throughout their fields, they would spread this other seed. Matthew is very specific. He calls it zizania seed in the Greek. Very specific seed. If you're going to speak that way in English, you would call it darnel seed. Darnel seed grows and initially looks identical to wheat coming up. It's not going to be obvious. Furthermore, though, darnel seed, the one Matthew specifically references, is typically poisonous. So if you take, at the end, a team of reapers, and they go out in the field with their sickles, and they're bringing in the wheat, the reason it's economic ruin is either no one's going to buy your wheat, or you're going to have to painstakingly go through and pick out wheat and weed, wheat and weed. So really, it's setting them up for economic collapse. He says, Jesus, that the weeds that come up were sown by Satan, people who would have him as the one they want to follow. It's a concept he brings up elsewhere. For instance, John 8:44, Jesus says to the Pharisees, if memory serves, "You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires." They have a different father. They're serving something entirely different. But here's where the parable, I think, is so helpful. In the parable, they're growing up together. Right? In this parable, it's the wheat and the weeds grow up side by side. When there's a rainy day, they both benefit. When the sun is out, you see a lot of growth. When the drought comes through, both are hindered. He says believers are going to be in a world where they are right alongside of other folks, and then you are looking at them and you think, man, it doesn't seem any different for me than it does for them. That's not a new concept. So Psalm 73, verse 3, he says, "For I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For they have no pangs until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek." Just real fast. Fat and sleek means something entirely different. All right? I think I probably at the beach have been called fat and sleek before, and it was not a compliment. If I could reinterpret, healthy and toned. Right? They're healthy and toned. So he says they're healthy and toned. These wicked doers, they are not in trouble as others are. They are not stricken like the rest of mankind. Therefore, pride is their necklace. Violence covers them as a garment. Their eyes swell out through their fatness, through their toned body. Their hearts overflow with follies. They scoff and speak malice. Loftily, they threaten with oppression. They threaten oppression. He goes all the way down and he continues this way. "Behold, these are the wicked, always at ease, they increase in riches." He's saying, man, we're looking around at the weeds, and they're growing like a weed. This doesn't seem right. So he's presenting this same kind of problem of evil moment. So back in our parable, Matthew 13, he says, here is the solution Jesus presents. It's a very simple solution. He says, allow them both to continue to grow, and you're going to see the difference when, as you recall in the verse, it says you see the difference when the fruit comes out. Did you catch that? It says when it makes grain. It literally says when it makes fruit in the original language. When fruit starts to appear, you're going to see, oh, these are two very different things. But his solution is let them grow together until the end of the age. And at the end of the age, there is going to be a harvest. They will be sorted out. And at that point, he has what would truly have been a clever approach. They cooked with over a wood stove or over other debris that they could gather together to provide heat. So he says, you know what? This is actually going to work out. Take all of those weeds, we're going to let them dry out, and then we're going to throw them into the furnace. So here's where he lands. He says, God is absolutely in control. This is his world. But for the good of the wheat, he is delaying raining justice down. For the good of the wheat, he is delaying it. So you might say, initially at the outset. For us, he's saying, wait, for a believer. Those of you who are with your outcry, when are you going to fix this? It shouldn't be like this. It's not that that falls on deaf ears. But he is saying, wait. However, here's where I think the parable becomes the most helpful, is the explanation by Jesus at the end. Right? He gives this explanation, and he gives these 3 verses at the end of his explanation that tell you, okay, if I'm going to wait, if that's the best answer we have, is wait, it'll happen one day, that doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me. Well, he's going to give a quick, brief, profound, unbelievable, unfathomable set of truths, 2 truths, right at the end of his explanation. He says, hell is worse than you think, and deliverance is better than you imagined. Let me say them again. Hell is worse than you think. If you struggle with bitterness, I bet you don't believe that. At least not as fully as you should. Hell is worse than you think. Deliverance is better than you imagined. Here's what I would say. He's pointing to hell is worse than you think. The way Jesus describes it is a fiery furnace, a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. Let me make it an admission on my part. Anytime you preach on hell, I have never really found it received especially well. Some pastors have written, well, that's because we live in a snowflake culture. That's not true. You don't have to go far back in history, and you see when other people preached on hell, like Jonathan Edwards, he was run out of the church. And when you read the sermon that he preached, it was just very biblical. But people hate the concept. So much so that recently the Pope said, in a very unorthodox way, I hope there is no hell, or at least hope there's nobody in it. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. You know what was fascinating about the Pope's declaration, I hope there's no hell, at least there's nobody in it, is globally, he got a ton of backlash. I truly was shocked. I thought the response would be, man, finally, somebody sees that this is a ridiculous idea. No, he got a ton of backlash. Because there is something in you longing for justice. I think Rico Tice is right. He says this, in the human heart, there is a cry to heaven asking for hell. In the human heart, there is a cry to heaven asking for hell. Please tell me, in the end, they don't just get away with it. Please tell me there's justice. The time this hit home to me the most, a couple I got to know several years ago in South Carolina. I asked them when I ask all couples in their age demographic, do you have grandkids? And they said, no, we don't have any grandkids. They answered it in such a way that you could tell they've been down this road before, and they would rather dodge the question. So I didn't bring it up anymore. Finally, Monroe, the husband, confides in me. And he said, we did have a son. He was taken advantage of and murdered in his own friend's home by a police officer who ultimately, because of a series of technicalities, never spent a night in jail. if you tell Monroe, just sweep it under the rug. You just got to let it go. He knows in the depths of his soul to say there's never going to be any accountability would be a corrupt God. That in the depths of our soul, I think Rico Tice is exactly right. There's a cry from every human heart up to heaven. Please tell me there's real justice. Jesus knows there's going to be real, actual justice. So he's saying, have certainty in that. At the same time, he doesn't leave it there. He comes to this unbelievable promise. He says, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. I don't know if you've ever thought about the end of days, what that might look like. The prescription here is unbelievable. It's a description of vindication. That the wheat and the weeds grow next to each other for years, but finally they get before their Father in heaven, and the wheat is the group that shines like the sun, based on righteousness. Here's why I think this is incredibly profound. The idea is very simple, but it takes just a little imagination. You are not going to get to heaven and be vindicated for your righteousness. It's not that you and your neighbor grew up and you did the Jesus thing all along and you're going to get to heaven and they're going to be like, man, I wish I had hung out with you instead of going to that party. You were right all along. You're not going to be vindicated based on your righteousness. You are vindicated based on Jesus' righteousness. So you show up to heaven and you get treated as he would get treated. Imagine for just a moment, the person, one of the men who wanted Jesus killed, and delighted as they drove the nails through him. And they thought, finally, this guy's been a nobody. Finally, we're putting this to rest. Think about that guy when he gets to heaven. That guy before he stands before Jesus. And he sees the person on the throne and recognizes them. He's like, you got to be kidding me. The peasant from Nazareth we put to death is on the throne? Or that kind of vindication moment is unbelievable. But we feel like it just applies to Jesus. When you become a believer, everything that Jesus is, all of his righteousness, comes to you, transforms you. So that when you die here and show up as wheat in heaven, because you've put your faith and trust in Christ, it is Jesus who's showing up in heaven. Because you are in Christ. So much so that you shine like the sun. You show up. Let's put it, shine like the sun. That's too much. Let's make it realistic. You show up looking like $1 million. Right, did that hit? So, you show up the one who looks incredible. He's saying, that's the future. Both ways. So for right now, we do wait. but we wait with certainty over what the future looks like. Injustice is dealt with. But He is working for your good, the good of the wheat. And He's not going to do anything to damage that. Would you please stand as we sing this final song?